Before I tell you what I did, I need to tell you what I saw on a Tuesday morning in October, because that Tuesday is the reason I am sitting here telling this story at all, and if I start anywhere else, you will not understand the weight of it. I was sitting in a studio apartment with a cracked window and a coffee maker that took 4 minutes longer than it should and a phone in my hand that I had been staring at for 11 minutes without unlocking. Outside, the city was doing what cities do in October, grey and indifferent, moving around its own business without any awareness of the woman on the third floor who had just read a Forbes notification that had made the floor tilt beneath her feet. The notification said, Ryan Callahan, founder of Callahan Systems, rings opening bell as company completes $340 million IPO. Shares up 34 in first hour of trading. Ryan Callahan. My ex-husband. The man I had left 6 years ago because I had decided, with the confident stupidity of a woman who had never been hungry enough to understand what building something actually costs, that he was going nowhere. I sat with the phone in my hand for 11 minutes. Then I did something I am not proud of. I opened our old message thread, the one I had never deleted, the one that ended 6 years ago with his words, "I hope you find what you are looking for," and I typed a message. 3 sentences. I sent it before I could think clearly about what I was doing. He never replied. Not that day. Not the week after. Not ever. And the silence of that non-reply taught me more about what I had thrown away than anything else that happened in the 6 years between the day I left and the Tuesday I watched his name trend on every financial news channel simultaneously. This is not a story about Ryan. He does not need a story. He has a 340 million one already. This is my story. The story of the woman who had everything she needed and could not see it, who traded a foundation for a facade, and who spent 6 years learning the difference the hard way. I am telling it because I think there are people watching this who are standing where I stood, looking at the person beside them and seeing only what they are not yet rather than what they are building toward, and I want you to hear this before you make the mistake I made. Because the most expensive thing I ever did was leave a man who was quietly becoming extraordinary, and I did it because I mistook his silence for stagnation and his work ethic for dullness and his refusal to perform success for an absence of it. Stay with me. Because what Ryan did in those 6 years, while I was learning lessons the expensive way, is the part of this story that matters most. And if you pay attention to it, really pay attention, it will tell you something true about what it actually takes to build something that lasts. Welcome to Signed in Silence. My name is Sarah. And I am the cautionary tale. I met Ryan Callahan when I was 26 at a mutual friend's birthday dinner, the kind of dinner where everyone is performing a slightly better version of themselves and the conversation is loud and the wine is cheap and somebody always ends up talking too long about a thing nobody else cares about. Ryan was not performing. He was just there, quiet at the end of the table, eating his food and listening to everyone else with the focused attention of a person who finds people genuinely interesting rather than strategically useful. I noticed him because he was the only person at the table who was not trying to be noticed. We talked for 40 minutes after dinner on the pavement outside and I learned that he was a software engineer at a mid-sized tech company, that he was working on something on the side he called a project, that he had grown up in a small town 3 hours from the city and had put himself through computer science by working nights at a logistics warehouse, and that he had strong opinions about the structural integrity of bridges that I found oddly compelling at 11 p.m. on a Thursday. We dated for a year and got married on a Saturday in June in a small ceremony in his parents' backyard because neither of us wanted to spend money on a venue when that money could go toward the house fund, which was practical and which I respected at the time and which I occasionally resented later when my colleagues showed me their venue photos, which tells you something about how subtly a person's values can shift when they stop paying attention. The first 2 years of marriage were good in the ways that matter and unremarkable in the ways that are easy to mistake for insufficiency. Ryan was consistent and honest and genuinely kind, the kind that is not performed for an audience but is simply the texture of how a person moves through the world. He came home on time. He remembered things I mentioned in passing. He made coffee the way I liked it without being asked. He was interested in my day in the way that means actually interested, not politely waiting for his turn to talk. He was also, and this is the part one focused on with increasing resentment as the years went on, almost completely consumed by the project. The project had started before we met, a software platform he had been building in the evenings and on weekends, something to do with supply chain logistics optimization, which I understood only vaguely and which I had stopped asking about because the explanations required a technical foundation I did not have, and I did not want to admit that, so I had started nodding and changing the subject, and he had, graciously, stopped explaining. He worked on it every night after dinner. Not all night. He was disciplined about sleep in the way of someone who understands that a tired mind builds slowly. But 2 hours every evening, minimum, at the desk in the second bedroom we called the office, with headphones on and the door open, because he said the closed door made him feel isolated and the open door made him feel connected, even when I was watching television in the other room and not thinking about him at all. On Saturdays he worked from 9 to 1. That was the deal we had made, his words, 4 hours on Saturday morning are mine, the rest is ours. I had agreed to it when we were dating because 4 hours seemed reasonable and generous and like the compromise of a man who understood balance. By year 3 of marriage it felt like an imposition. By year 4 it felt like a symptom. I want to be honest about what happened to my thinking in those years because the honest version is more useful than the flattering one. I was not unhappy exactly. I was restless in the way that people are restless when they have a good life and an insufficient appreciation for it. My friends were getting promotions and buying nicer apartments and going on holidays that looked a particular way on social media, and I was measuring my life against those images in the way that damages everyone who does it and from which no good has ever come. Ryan was not flashy. He drove a 7-year-old car. He maintained himself because he said paying a mechanic for something he could learn to do was a poor allocation of resources. He wore the same rotation of plain shirts and did not own a suit he had bought after 2019. He had no interest in restaurants where the portions were small and the prices were not, or in bars where the lighting was designed to make everyone look like they were having a better time than they were. When I suggested these things he came willingly, without complaint, but with the mild bemusement of a man who found the economics difficult to justify. I started to find his practicality embarrassing. That is the word I would not have used at the time, but which is the accurate one. I was embarrassed by his car and his shirts and his Saturday mornings at the desk and the fact that when people asked what he did he said software engineer rather than something that sounded like it was going somewhere. I was embarrassed by a man who was, at that exact time, building something that would one day be worth $340 million, and I was embarrassed because I could not see it and I did not try to see it and I was too busy looking at what he did not have to notice what he was building. Marcus arrived at my office in year 4 of our marriage, a consultant brought in for a 3-month engagement, and he was everything Ryan was not in all the ways I had convinced myself mattered. He was loud and confident and expensive in that particular way of men who have learned that the performance of success is often mistaken for success itself. He wore good suits. He took clients to dinners at restaurants I had always wanted to go to. He had opinions about wine and travel and said things at meetings that made everyone laugh and look at him at the same time. He looked at me like I was interesting. Not in the way Ryan looked at me, which was steady and specific and based on actually knowing me. In the way of a man who looks at a woman and decides she is interesting because he has decided to be interested, and which feels, when you are restless and underappreciating your life, indistinguishable from being seen. I told myself for 3 months that what I felt was nothing. Then I told myself it was something, but I would not act on it. Then I told myself that the fact I felt it at all was evidence that my marriage was wrong for me, which is the story restless people tell themselves when they want to do something they know is a mistake and need a narrative that makes it feel like wisdom. I told Ryan on a Sunday night in March, the night before Marcus's consulting engagement ended and he was flying back to his city. I told him I was not happy. I told him I felt like we wanted different things. I told him I needed more than what we had, which was the vague and devastating sentence that means I have already decided and I am telling you rather than asking you. Ryan sat across the kitchen table and listened without interrupting, which was how he did everything, and when I finished he was quiet for a long time. Then he asked me one question. Is there someone else? I said no. Which was technically true in the way that the most damaging lies are technically true. He looked at me for a moment with the eyes of a man who knows more than he is saying and has decided, out of love or dignity or both, not to say it. Then he nodded. He said, I hope you find what you are looking for, Sarah. Not angry. Not begging. Just that, spoken quietly, with the kind of finality that belongs to people who understand that some doors, once closed, should stay closed. He moved out within the week. He took his desk, his computer equipment, his books, his 7-year-old car, and the coffee maker. He left the furniture because he said he would be fine without it. He filed the divorce papers without a lawyer because we did not own property jointly and the finances were straightforward, and he said paying 2 lawyers to divide a modest savings account was not a good use of anyone's money. The last time I saw him was at the signing. He was wearing one of his plain shirts. He signed his name and slid the papers across and stood up and shook my hand, the hand of the woman he had been married to for 5 years, and said he wished me well and walked out. I watched him go and felt, beneath the relief I had been counting on, a small and inconvenient sadness that I set aside because Marcus was flying in that weekend and I had things to look forward to. Marcus and I lasted 14 months. I want to give you the full honest shape of it because the abbreviated version makes it sound like simple karma and the reality was messier and more instructive than that. The first 4 months were everything I had told myself I wanted. Dinners and trips and the particular intoxication of being chosen loudly by someone who makes other people look. I felt seen in the way I had convinced myself Ryan had not been seeing me, which I understand now was not about Ryan's vision but about my own. Then the next 10 months were the education. Marcus was generous with things that cost money and careless with things that did not. He forgot conversations. He was late without apology. He had the particular self-centeredness of people who have been told they are exceptional for long enough that they have stopped considering whether other people find the experience of them tiring. He was not cruel. He was simply, fundamentally, a person who was most interested in himself, and the interest he had shown in me in those early months was the interest of acquisition rather than attention, and once I was acquired the attention redistributed toward the next thing he was deciding to want. He ended it on a Tuesday, calmly, over a dinner at the kind of restaurant I had once found glamorous and had by then come to understand was expensive the way things are expensive when they are selling atmosphere rather than substance. He said we wanted different things. He said he hoped I would find what I was looking for. He used Ryan's words. I do not think he knew they were Ryan's words. But I sat across from him in that restaurant and heard Ryan's voice coming out of Marcus's mouth and understood something that I had been refusing to understand for 2 years. The words were the same. The men were not. Ryan had said them with love. Marcus said them with relief. And the difference between those 2 versions of the same sentence was the difference between everything. I moved into a studio apartment. I was 33 years old with a cracked window and a slow coffee maker and a social media feed full of people whose lives looked like the life I had been trying to build and who I envied with a completeness that exhausted me. I am going to tell you what Ryan was doing during those 6 years. Not because I had any visibility into it at the time, I did not, I had removed myself from his life completely and he had not reappeared in mine. But because after that Tuesday in October I spent considerable time reconstructing it from the public record, the press releases and the investor interviews and the one long profile in a technology magazine that I read 4 times and which made me feel things I do not have clean words for. Ryan had taken the project, his supply chain logistics platform, and after the divorce he had worked on it with the focused, undistracted attention of a man who no longer had to divide his evenings between his desk and the background noise of a marriage that was ending. He had found a co-founder through a contact at his old company. He had taken a small seed round from an angel investor he had met at a conference, not a glamorous conference, a mid-sized industry event in a mid-sized city that the press profile described as exactly the kind of unglamorous place where real things get built by people who are not there to be seen. He had moved into a small apartment and kept his expenses minimal and put everything back into the company, every month, for 3 years. He had hired carefully, 1 person at a time, for capability rather than credentials. He had lost 2 major clients in year 2 and rebuilt the revenue base in year 3 without taking additional funding because he did not want the pressure of investor expectations to distort his product decisions. The technology magazine profile described him as pathologically patient. It quoted his co-founder saying Ryan had a gift for understanding which problems were worth solving slowly and which shortcuts would cost you later. It quoted an early employee saying he was the kind of leader who never made you feel like the work you were doing was anything other than exactly what mattered most. He had not changed. That was the thing I kept returning to, reading the profile in my studio apartment at 2 in the morning with the cracked window letting in October air. He had not become someone different in order to succeed. He had simply continued being exactly who he had always been, with more time and less distraction, and the thing he had been building in the second bedroom while I was watching television and resenting his Saturday mornings had become, at the pace that real things grow, something worth 340 million. I had left a man who was building a cathedral because I could not see past the scaffolding. I sent the message. I am not going to tell you what it said because the specifics are not what matters. What matters is that I sent it, and he did not reply, and the silence of that non-reply settled something in me that had been unsettled for 6 years. He was not ignoring me to be cruel. I know that because I know who he is. He was not replying because there was nothing to reply to. Not because he was angry, not because he wanted me to feel the weight of what I had done, but because his life had moved so completely past that chapter that reopening it served no purpose for either of us. His silence was not punishment. It was simply the evidence of a man who had finished grieving something and moved into the next version of himself without looking back. That is the part that educated me most completely. Not the 340 million. Not Marcus's abandonment. Not the studio apartment or the cracked window or the slow coffee maker. The silence. The complete, ungrudging, forward-facing silence of a man who had understood, earlier than I had, that the only direction worth moving is forward. I am 35 now. I have rebuilt, slowly, the way real things are rebuilt, which is without shortcuts and without the expectation of someone else's validation. I went back to work seriously, the way I had not worked since before I got comfortable in the marriage and started measuring my life by other people's photographs. I was promoted last year. I am putting money away with the diligence Ryan always had and which I used to find unromantic and which I now understand is the most romantic thing a person can do for their future self. I have not found anyone. I am not in a hurry. I have learned to be suspicious of my own impatience, which was the original instrument of my worst decision, and I am practicing the thing I watched Ryan do for 5 years without recognizing its value. I am playing the long game. I want to talk to you directly for a moment, the way I wish someone had talked to me when I was 31 and restless and making decisions based on what things looked like rather than what they were building toward. If there is someone in your life who wakes up early and works late and drives a car that is not impressive and wears shirts that do not signal anything and spends their free time building something you do not fully understand, look closer. Not because they are necessarily Ryan. Not because every quiet hardworking person is a billionaire in waiting. But because the things that last are built the way Ryan built his company. Slowly, consistently, without performance, without shortcuts, with the kind of patience that is invisible until it suddenly isn't. The most dangerous lie I told myself was that consistency was the same as stagnation. That a man who came home on time and worked on his project and drove a sensible car and did not need an audience for his ambition was a man who was going nowhere. Consistency is not stagnation. Consistency is the mechanism by which everything worth having gets built. It is the daily return to the desk, the 2 hours every evening, the 4 hours every Saturday morning, repeated without drama or announcement until the accumulation becomes undeniable. Ryan did not become successful. He had always been the kind of person who would become successful. I just left before the scaffolding came down. I think about that Saturday morning ritual now with a clarity I could not have had at the time. 9 to 1, every week, without fail. Not glamorous. Not exciting. Not the kind of thing that makes a good story at a dinner party. Just a man at a desk doing the work while the city moved around him and his wife watched television in the next room, and his project grew, line by line, week by week, into something that would one day ring a bell on an exchange floor. 4 hours every Saturday. Multiplied by 52 weeks. Multiplied by 6 years. That is 1,248 hours of Saturday mornings that I resented and he invested. 1,248 hours of the work that looked like nothing and was everything. If you are the person at the desk, I want you to hear this. The people who cannot see what you are building are not seeing you clearly. Their inability to see it is not evidence that it is not there. Keep going. The scaffolding is not the cathedral. The patient work of the ordinary day, repeated without applause, is the only foundation anything real has ever been built on. The world will see it when it is done. You do not need them to see it while you are building. If you are the person watching from the couch, I want you to hear this too. Look at what the people beside you are building, not at what they have already arrived at. The arrival is the easy part to see. The building is the part that tells you who someone is. And a person who builds quietly, consistently, without performance, is showing you something more valuable than any restaurant or suit or social media photograph ever could. I opened the Forbes notification on a Tuesday in October and I sat with my phone for 11 minutes and I sent a message that was never answered, and in the silence of that no reply I received the most honest education of my life. The lesson was not that I had married the wrong person. The lesson was that I had not yet learned to value the right things, and that until you learn to value the right things, the right person is invisible to you, no matter how clearly they are standing in the light. I am still learning. I am still at the desk, in my own way, doing the work that does not look like much from the outside. I am still driving a car that is not impressive. I have started drinking my coffee before it gets cold. Small things. But I am learning to understand that small things, done consistently, are how everything worth anything gets made. That is my story. A good man, a restless woman, 6 years, and a Tuesday morning notification that taught me everything I should have already known. If this story made you look up from your phone and think about the person beside you, or the work in front of you, or the quiet builder in your life you have been taking for granted, take that as your sign. Put the phone down. Look at what is being built. Before the scaffolding comes down and you are standing outside the cathedral wondering how you missed the whole construction. Subscribe to Signed in Silence. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from. And if you are the person at the desk right now, building something nobody else can see yet, keep going. I will see you in the next one.